Okay, everybody. Well, I'd like to welcome you to today's session about open access. And I'd first like to ask you if you're all warm enough in here. I sat in here just before lunch and I nearly froze. So if anyone is getting terribly cold, please feel free to stand up and do some star jumps or something to keep yourself warm. So today we've got three fantastic speakers to talk about open access and new models. I mean, open access has now been around for a heck of a long time. My name is Pippa Smart, in case I forgot to tell you that, and I'm the editor of the ALPSP and SSP journal, Learned Publishing. And we're celebrating our 30th birthday this year, and looking back on the articles we published, the first article we published about open access was in the year 2000. So this is now 18 years down the line. Open access has become a much more mainstream model, but we've still got a lot of questions to ask about flipping over to open access as a more prevalent business model for academic and scholarly publishing. So, as I said, we have three fantastic speakers, and I'd like to start with Rachel Burley from Springer Nature to kick off the session to talk about the research that Springer Nature has done recently about open access, and a fantastic new result that was announced last week in that I believe 77% of articles authored by UK authors are now published open access in Springer Nature journals, which is a fantastic achievement in the last few years since the 2012 Finch report. So if I could ask Rachel to start.
Yes,
thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me okay? Oh, it's so nice to see so many friendly faces. I wanted to go to all the other 2 o'clock sessions, actually, because they were all really good, but I'm doing this one. So thank you very much for making time to come and listen to the talk. So we're going to, there's 3 of us speaking, and then we have about 15 minutes for Q&A. So I'm just going to take about 15 minutes and then hand over to Ivy. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Rachel Burley. I'm the publishing director for the BMC Group, which is now part of Springer Nature, and most of you will know that Biomed Central was the very first gold open access, born open access publisher, and is now 18 years old, so no longer a toddler and now a teenager, and has been incredibly successful. But actually, I'm going today to take a little bit of a different approach and talk about much more about the transition to a fully gold OA ecosystem in scholarly publishing, and just what the challenges are and how potentially some of them might be tackled. So just to start off, I just want to talk about how OA is actually very important to Springer Nature and to most of us in the room. And as you can see from this timeline, that actually Springer Nature has been engaging with open access for over 20 years. And last year, 30% of everything that was published gold OA was published in a Springer Nature journal. So it's a real achievement that we're proud of. But despite that, you know, the actual growth of gold open access has been much slower than I think some of us who've been in the industry for a while would think. It's been a lot slower than some had expected. So there's about 300,000 gold open access articles published now, but it's still, you know, only about 15% of the total research output, and so it's not actually as high as we might hoped. And it's taken 20 years to get to that 15%, so it's actually very slow. So why is this? Why is it taking so long? And I've got a couple of reasons that I believe this is the case. One of them is that initially publishers were very slow to offer the hybrid option. It took quite a long while before all the publishers said, okay, we're going to make gold open access a possibility in all of our existing journals. And some of them, you know, took a few years before they decided they wanted to take that offer. And the other one is that actually some funders are wary of the hybrid option traditionally, and they still are. So you have a sort of system where not the publishers weren't embracing it and neither were the funders, and I think that's why this has taken so long. So there are now 10,000 hybrid journals, but in fact still only 20% of all gold OA is published in hybrid journals, and 80% is in the fully open access journals. So that's not the result perhaps that some had been hoping for, and that's probably why it's taken a long time to achieve the goals that we were hoping. So obviously, if you're launching a new open access journal, it's going to take some time to set it up, to establish it, to build the reputation that it needs, and all of that is a lengthy process, whereas we have thousands of journals already existing that which do the job very nicely. So I think now there's a couple of bigger reasons that the growth isn't as progressive as we'd like, and that it's taking a long while. One of those is the research system itself, and the other one is author preferences. So just to talk a little bit initially about the research system. So there is no one single global guideline or mandate or policy about open access. It's very disparate, and as you can see from this map, the different regions have different policies, with some being a green policy, others being mandated open access with dedicated funds. And it's really difficult for publishers to serve this market when it varies so much regionally, and that's been traditionally one of the reasons why publishers haven't been able to accommodate all of the markets to their satisfaction. So if you look at one of the ways that publishers could potentially help make this transition to OA, you might think, well, let's just flip the hybrid journals to open access. This is a really good way to do it. But actually, this is a case study for a relatively young hybrid journal, and I haven't named it here, but the pattern is very similar for lots that I've seen. And this journal basically reached 30% of open access as a hybrid model in year 6. So at that point, in year 7, it flipped to fully open access. Yet you can see from year 7 right through until year 9, there was a severe drop in the number of publications, and even in year 11, the growth wasn't back up to the number of publications before it flipped. So why would this be? So it's, as I referred to before, it's the regional differences. So you find when you flip a journal that some of the author base are facing the payment of an APC that perhaps their grant has ended and they don't have the funding for, and so they will then find somewhere else to publish, and that's what causes this kind of dip. You can offer fee waivers, and on flipping journals to OA, many publishers do, but then you can find yourself sort of shifting from a volume challenge to a financial challenge, and so that's not always ideal either. So this is a difficult model if possible. It is possible, and lots of us have done it with journals, but it's not universally successful. So talking about more about the author perspective, is the reality is, and most of us in the room will know this, excuse me, the authors still prefer to publish in a journal that has a strong reputation and that they're very familiar with and that's well established and trusted in their communities. And that's quite often more important to many authors than publishing open access or publishing gold open access immediately. And so although open access journals are now growing and developing, and many of them are sort of challenging the well-established hybrid journals, the vast majority of the really strong journals are still hybrid. And so what we really need to do is find a way to try and make this system work so that it's a combination of the hybrid and fully gold, and try to find a way to make the system transition using both of those methods, given these complex set of circumstances. So I just briefly wanted to talk about offsetting, which just to clarify what offsetting is, and some of you in the room will know this, but offsetting is essentially the Springer Nature description of this, is when an organization offers on behalf of all researchers in a country to make an agreement with a publisher to cover the cost of publishing open access in hybrid journals. And at the same time, there's a central payment mechanism, and the fee also covers articles that are published in the subscription model, so the reading fee, as it were, as well as the publishing fee. So this model has been quite successful. And actually, you know, this is, as Pippa mentioned at the beginning, there are in Northern Europe 4 countries where Springer Nature has made this model very successful. They're shown up here on the screen, and essentially, you know, over the last 5 years, through using an offsetting agreement in those countries, we have been able to make a fundamental shift to primarily open access publications in those regions. So if you look at the uptake, on the top half of this slide, you'll see that the uptake of OA in these countries in 2017, and it's as much as 90% in Sweden. This is Springer Nature journals, so that's a fundamental shift to open access, so it's huge, and the right conditions were in place to make that happen, and of course, that doesn't always happen in every country. So we're looking at 4 here where we really did have the right conditions in place. Uptake's been very high in these 4 regions, and it's really because, why has it been so high? Well, it's because the authors had a choice of over 2,000 journals that they could publish open access in. The payment was all covered, they didn't have to worry about the administration. And then from the organisation's perspective, there was an acceptable level of APC that had been agreed as part of the arrangement, and so it was very easy for the organisations to administrate as well. And so I think under those conditions, you know, with these regional structures that are actually quite complex, I'm sort of rushing through it here, it's not as easy as it sounds, they're quite complex to put in place, but with the right conditions you can get to these levels of open access. And then on the bottom half of the slide, you'll see that this is the average article growth in these countries. So average article growth across the market was 2.1%, but all of these regions actually saw a growth in output at the same time as the result of these initiatives. So I just wanted to also make mention, and Pippa, thank you for the promo for this at the beginning, but we have just released a Gold OA case study of the UK. If you Google it, you'll come across it right away. So it is a really in-depth, detailed study of what's happened over the last 5 years, specifically in the UK. And it gives a lot more of the statistics behind some of the slides I've just sort of taken you on a whistle-stop tour through. This is one of the infographics that you can find online related to that, and it really does capture, I think, fundamentally the picture of what's happened in the UK between 2013 and last year, where this massive shift from 35% of articles that we published in the UK being open access in 2013 shifted to 77% last year. And so this is really, you know, the country, basically in the UK now we have got a predominantly open access model, at least for Springer Nature journals. So before I hand over to Ivy, I just wanted to say, so I do think this is not, it's not as easy as it sounds, but there is one model here for a successful transition, but it does really require that you have all stakeholders engaged in working together to put the conditions in place. And really that is to have support from the governments, funders and institutions, authors who are willing to publish open access, and then publishers who provide the right sort of portfolio of products and publishing options for authors that are attractive. And if you can get all of those ingredients, then you may have a recipe for a successful transition. Thank you.